Here, people. This is one of the larger meetings of our romantics poetry class. We don't have quite this many people in our class. We've got the romantics class. We wanted to include some modern poets and prose authors, which were Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg. When we originally thought this up, we decided it might be we might have a good fortune of having Mr. Ginsberg come here, and indeed he did. Mr. Ginsberg is a New Jersey boy. He was born and raised in the Patterson area, as I think you all know, and his curriculum vitae is a book in itself. I really won't go into that. He's extremely well known. I think that what's particularly important with Mr. Ginsberg is the fact that he shows the power of a poet. It was with a small group of creative men in the 50s, and these men have really changed society. And if we look and see what's happened through the 60s and the 70s, I think you can easily track that. It is with great, in fact, with great honor that I introduce to you Mr. Allen Ginsberg.
Good evening. How many here are in the actual class? Raise your hand. And the class is on romantic poetry, as far as I understand. So you dealt with some Blake, some Keats.
We haven't gotten Keats yet. We got
Shelley. Wordsworth, Shelley.
We did Coleridge. We haven't gotten to Shelley yet. Byron.
Does anybody have a Northern anthology or an anthology that would have some of the romantic poets? I wonder if we could, because that's part of the project.
Do you have
Who has the text? We borrow it. Whatever you got. So I thought maybe what have we got here? English romantic writer. So, what I thought, as a preface to what I'm doing, would be maybe to read aloud Shelley, Ode to the West Wind. That yet. And then move on to present. It's still finding everything. And the rest of you who are sitting in, are you part of the school or the neighbors? How many here know the Ode to the West Wind? Raise your hands. When I went to school, which was quite a long while ago in high school in the 30s, that was taken for granted that everybody would have some Shakespeare, some Macbeth, or some Blake and some Shelley and a few of the romantic poets, a little bit of the Ode to the West Wind, or Keats' Ode to Melancholy, Wordsworth's Sonnet on Westminster Bridge, and those are all part of the high school studies. A lot of that has been lost. And so let me focus on this and find what I'm looking for.
Page 10, Page 1026.
So what the purpose of my reading is to draw some parallels between my own writing and writing by Gregory, Corso, or Kerouac, or other of the deep writers, and the old tradition of Shelley. But the one problem is that there are people that are without seats up there, and there, any of you younger people, there's plenty of room up front here if you want to come up here and sit down and make room for some older people to come into the house. We have this space, so let's make use of it. Plenty of room up here. You can sit around on the stage, on the ground, and make yourself comfortable. There may be a few extra chairs around. Are there any extra seats in the audience there? There are 3 or 4 seats over there that are not being taken if you want to sit down. Let's go around there. 1, 2, 3, 4, the 6th row. So, what I would like to do is read aloud a poem called The Ode to the West Wind by Shelley. The subject of the poem is wind, or breath, or spirit, Latin, spiritus, breathing. So spirit is really breath, or he is using the wind, the west wind, as the breath of earth, so to speak. And the subject of this poem, as in a number of poems, is the breath itself. Where there's breath, there's life. Where there's breath, there's spirit. So the breath as the breath of life. And Shelley's idea of launching his own mind and his thoughts out on his breath in this poem is really interesting, because if you read this poem aloud, following the punctuation to indicate where you should breathe, you are really taking into your body Shelley's breathing and replicating his physiological nervous system in your own body, and you get high on it. Or hyperventilate. Not high, but it's also a great piece of music, or a great piece of rhythm, great piece of timing, and a great set of breaths, great sounds. And so we would say this one poem is a icon that Jack Kerouac knew from grammar school and high school, that William Burroughs knew, that Gregory Corso, the poet, knew, that I knew very well because my father taught it in high school in Paterson, New Jersey. So I knew it when I was a kid around the house. And it sort of entered into my own physiology and breathing and rhythm and Kerouac. And so it's a touchstone or icon for us, for a tradition of ecstatic poetry, or exhilaration of poetry, or exuberance in poetry, and deep breath in poetry. He wrote it, I guess, a year or so before he died, 1 or 2 years before he died. He actually prophesied his death by drowning. Well, no, again, that Aeneas, but for those who are interested in it, his other elegy for Keats called Aeneas at the end has that prophecy of his own drowning by being blown into the sea. The winds blowing his boat, his sailboat, into the ocean. O wild west wind, thou breath of autumn's being, thou from whose unseen presence the leaves dead are driven, like ghosts from an enchanter fleeing, yellow and black and pale and hectic red, pestilence-stricken multitudes. O thou who chariotest to their dark wintry bed the winged seeds, where they lie cold and low, each like a corpse within its grave, until thine azure sister of the spring shall blow her clarion o'er the dreaming earth, and fill driving sweet buds like flocks to feed in air, with living hues and odors, plain and ill. Wild spirit, which art moving everywhere, destroyer and preserver, here, oh, here. Thou on whose stream, mid the steep sky's commotion, looked loose clouds like earth's decaying leaves are shed, shook from the tangled boughs of heaven and ocean, angels of rain and lightning, there are spread on the blue surface of thine airy surge, like the bright hair uplifted from the head of some fierce Maenad, even from the dim verge of the horizon to the zenith's height, the locks of the approaching storm, thou dirge of the dying year, to which this closing night will be the dome of a vast sepulchre, vaulted with all thy congregated might of vapors, from whose solid atmosphere black rain and fire and hail will burst. Oh, here, thou who didst waken from his summer dreams the blue Mediterranean, where he lay, lulled by the coil of his crystalline streams, beside a pumice isle in Bysshe's bay, and saw in sleep old palaces and towers quivering within the waves' intenser day, all overgrown with azure moss and flowers so sweet the sense faints picturing them. Thou for whose path the Atlantic's level powers cleave themselves into chasms, while far below the sea blooms and the oozy woods which wear the sapless foliage of the ocean know thy voice, and suddenly grow gray with fear, and tremble and despoil themselves. Oh, here, if I were a dead leaf thou mightest bear, if I were a swift cloud to fly with thee, a wave to pant beneath thy power, and share the impulse of thy strength, only less free than thou, oh, uncontrollable! If even I were as in my boyhood, and could be the comrade of thy wanderings over heaven, and then, when to outstrip thy skiey speed scarce seemed a vision, I would ne'er have striven as thus with thee in prayer in my sore need. Oh, lift me as a wave, a leaf, a cloud. I fall upon the thorns of life. I bleed. A heavy weight of hours has chained and bowed one, two, like thee, tameless and swift and proud. Make me thy lyre, even as the forest is. What if my leaves are falling like its own? The tumult of thy mighty harmonies will take from both a deep autumnal tone, sweet though in sadness. Be thou, spirit fierce, my spirit. Be thou me, impetuous one. Drive my dead thoughts over the universe like withered leaves to quicken a new birth, and by the incantation of this verse, scatter as from an unextinguished spark, ashes and sparks, my words among mankind. Be through my lips to unawakened earth the trumpet of a prophecy. Oh, wind, if winter comes, can spring be far behind? Kind of ecstatic, exuberant energy measured on the breath. So it's sort of like the joining of heaven and earth in the sense of the earth or the body, the breath. Physical breath comes from the body into the physical thing. The thoughts come more from the mind, the heavenly, the impalpable, the non-material, and they go out as proclamation on the vehicle of the breath. So there is the old Taoist and Chinese or Oriental notion of the emperor joins heaven and earth, or the poet or speech joins mind and body, or speech synchronizes mind and body. Or you might say speech is a proclamation from the throne, or can be. if it's the right chutzpah, the right courage, the right proclamation, the right sense of imperial straight back, good head and shoulders, proclaiming the mind outside into the phenomenal world. The poetry as proclamation, as one aspect of poetry. Here, like trumpets, in a sense, trumpet call of enunciation, really, done on the breath itself is interesting, done just by breath. So the subject matter of this poem is interesting because it is the breath itself, the wind, the west wind, wanting to identify his own breath with the breath of earth, or the wind, the west wind itself. What is the west wind anyway? What particular thing? What was that first? What's the difference between west and the east? Is there any symbolic difference in the Western tradition? Huh? There's probably some symbolic difference. Yeah. Uh-huh. Okay. That'd be good. Renovation. Yeah, renewal or resurrection. Oh. Resurrection of spirit. Resurrection of soul. So that's a kind of interesting shot. Gregory Corso, as a poet, was very much involved with the inspiration of Shelley. Shelley, that's another interesting word, inspiration. Inspire, breathing. You're coming from spiritus again, from breathing. So poetic inspiration is a state of unobstructed breath light, when the body is like a hollow reed, so to speak. If anybody of you are interested or have seen photographs of the very famous Indian saint Ramakrishna, a 19th century Indian holy man. There's a very famous photograph of him, supposedly in a state of ecstasy, where you can tell that his body is full of air. It's like a hollow tube of air, and it's an unobstructed breath. So in a state of inspiration, you could say, poetic inspiration means more or less that physiological state of unobstructed breath, where the breath is completely clear and the thoughts flow spontaneously, almost clairvoyantly, it's not a transcendental excitement so much as it is a physical state of total relaxation and total clear, unobstructed breath, as distinct from a more neurotic, pulling yourself in, or opening out to the phenomenal world rather than sheltering and protecting yourself. So it means a certain amount of vulnerability, but at the same time, the kingly or imperial attitude of proclamation, like king giving a proclamation to his subject or to the phenomenal world, or the poet or bard, trumpeting his thought out into the outside of his subjective realm, or revealing his subjective realm to the space, which encompasses everybody's consciousness. So I thought that would be an interesting thing to begin with, since you're into the romantic. The study is romantic. Usually romantic is taken between dreamy or neurotically fantastical, rather than totally present, totally in your own body, totally at one with your own skin and body and breathing. And at its best, romantic that can be total presence and awareness of the space that you're in and the vastness of the space. The problem is the key is that this sense of being awake, completely awake, rather than daydreaming off. And as one awake, aware of the space around, including the fact that there is plenty of space down here you can sit. So observant of what's going on in the phenomenal world around you rather than daydreaming and escaping it. And not only aware of the present space, but of the surrounding space or the panoramic awareness that we're in a room, somewhat artificially lit, but above us is a sky, Lakewood area in New Jersey, and we're on a planet in the solar system at the edge of a spiral nebula in an infinitely vast space. And that consciousness of vastation or panoramic awareness is probably characteristic of the romantic ecstasy that you'll find in some of Shelley and some of Wordsworth, like his sonnet on the Westminster Bridge, which might, since it is such a good example of that sense of panoramic awareness, might pick up on that. Could you look that up and let me know where it's Wordsworth sonnet on Westminster, lines composed on Westminster Bridge title. Check that out. We can maybe make use of that as a specimen. Have you done that in the Wordsworth code? But it'd be interesting to look at from this angle of presence and awareness. Somebody got it there? Somebody got a copy of the book that they Pardon me? So, composed upon Westminster Bridge, September 3rd, 1802. So it's located in time. My contention, in a way, is that what you get a glimpse from this poem is a glimpse of vast space. Earth has not, Westminster Bridge in the middle of London, Westminster, happy yesterday. Earth has not anything to show more fair. Dull would he be of soul who could pass by a sight so touching in its majesty. The city now doth like a garment wear the beauty of the morning, silent, fair, ships, towers, domes, theaters, and temples lie open unto the fields and to the sky, all bright and glittering in the smokeless air. Never did sun more beautifully steep in his first splendor valley, rock, or hill. Ne'er saw I, never felt a calm so deep. The river glideth at his own sweet will. Dear God, the very houses seem asleep, and all that mighty heart is lying still. And so what you get is the panorama of the rooftops, ships, towers, domes, theaters, temples lie open onto the fields and to the sky, and all of a sudden the gaze lifts into the entire. On the lower part of the visual panorama, you have the ship's tower, domes, temples, and all of a sudden, imagine the third of them in your mind's eye, you get a line open onto the sky. So you get the vast thing, which is much vaster than London. And so you get the little glimpse of panoramic awareness, a little bit like a Chinese scroll landscape in a sense. So if you look at a lot of the specimens of records of some romantic or ecstatic or aesthetic or mystical experience as expressed in the romantics, you might find some reference to some sense of oceanic vastness or panoramic awareness or sudden awakening in the depths of space, the depths of the cosmos, and realizing the vastness. And so as a poetic practice, for those of you who are interested in writing poetry, or improving your mind, one very interesting thing to do is several times a day, empty your mind into the sky. Literally, stop where you are, stop your mechanical thinking of, I got a parking ticket or I got to get class, and just like look into the sky with no particular purpose except, well, let's say dissolving a thought in empty space, in the blue empty space or cloudy empty space. It's as good as getting high on it. I think that's all you do when you get high on acid, is really your mind is dissolving into space. But you can do it free without the need of cops on your shoulder. The moral majority say you're not supposed to have mystical visions. So, if you get to Kerouac in his writing from his first book, The Town and the City Odd, you'll see that kind of panoramic awareness with a glimpse through over and over again. You'll be in the middle of a maybe in the middle of a description of a football field, and suddenly, so that the camera will pan back, and from the detail, you'll suddenly see the entire football field, and you'll see the high school around it, and the city streets around it, and then the trees, and the rest of the cityscape, and then the sky. In its verbal description of the scene, beginning with a detail within the scene. Or if you look at paintings by Bruegel or some of the Rembrandt landscapes, you also get that sense of panoramic awareness or vastness of everything going on human underneath this even more vast sky. So I was just thinking this as I came in as being maybe the characteristic of romantic poetry, some sense of cosmic, cosmos, but in a very literal way. A visual glimpse of cosmos, visual glimpse of immensity. We get that in Heart Frame, which I know is one of your favorite poets. Particularly the poem The Bridge. Get a lot in for my own poetry. I try to reproduce it. You can get it in one line even. The Japanese haikus that can give you that sense. There's the very famous one, "Oh ant, climb up Mount Fuji," but slowly, slowly. So you have the vast slope of Fuji and a little tiny ant. You suddenly get some sense of space. Or a wild sea and stretching out toward the Isle of Sado, the Milky Way. So you got, the Great Way, the Japanese paint with the Great Way. The boat in a wild sea, and then the Isle of Sado is ahead, but then stretching out from the Isle of Sado, the Milky Way, suddenly the glimpse lifts, and you've got the whole Milky Way, the entire heavens above your head. So in one line, as in a haiku, you can get that space glimpse. Well, my own attempt to imitate that, I had some haikus in a recent book where, but I called them American sentences. The haiku got to be a corny bird, sitting in front of a microphone, smelling the last Hitler's saliva. I think, no, that's different. Yeah. In the half light of dawn, this is an imitation of the wild sea stretching out to the Isle of Sado, the Milky Way. In the half light of dawn, a few birds warble under the Pleiades. So you have the horizon, birds in the trees, then suddenly under the Pleiades. Or in another sense, the transshifting of time, caught shoplifting, ran out of the department store at sunrise and woke up. Caught shoplifting, ran out of the department store at sunrise and woke up. Here, the space is not the space of sky, but the space is between dream and waking. A sudden shift, so that sudden expansion of from the claustrophobia of court shoplifting. There is a transitional ran out of the department store. Still, the pursued criminal in a claustrophobic dream. At sunrise, well, that opens it a little, and woke up, then it opened it completely, opened the mind space completely. So, I think I've gotten myself into a corner here for painting. I don't have any writing of my own, really, that fits all that. Fits that notion, but I was thinking more of Kerouac. So, okay, I've talked a bit. We've been studying one other. Since we've now got into mind space rather than physical space, but we'll dig a little bit of Gregory Corso. Have you studied any of him? Corso. Gregory Corso. Behind your curriculum? There's a riprap that was the Gary Snyder. Give me a moment. Find the exception of the Gregory Corso, which opens up that same mind space. Okay. Birthplace Revisited, a very early poem from the 50s. And among the lead writers, Gregory Corso, Peter Orlovsky, Jack Kerouac, William Burroughs, myself, Michael McClure, Gary Snyder, Philip Whalen would be the core group, I would say. Corso, I think, is among the greatest of the poets. This is very early lyric. But the same space I was talking about of waking, between waking, sleep and waking, the claustrophobia of sleep and waking. Birthplace Revisited. I stand in the dark light in the dark street and look up at my window. I was born there. The lights are on. Other people are moving about. I'm with raincoat, cigarette in mouth, hat over eye, hand on gat. I cross the street and enter the building. The garbage cans haven't stopped smelling. I woke up the first flight. Dirty ears aims a knife at me. So this is about the same situation now, in a claustrophobic situation, a nightmare. Again, dirty ears aims a knife at me, dot, dot, dot. I pump them full of lost watches. Time transition, lost watches. Well, just from childhood, kids have watches, they lose them, they talk about watches, they steal watches. But I pump them full of lost watches means I suddenly awake from the daydream in a way. In another little space shot, I suppose you could apply it. I don't think it's exactly the thing. But Italian Extravaganza. Mrs. Lombardi's month-old son is dead. I saw it in Rizzo's funeral parlor. A small, purplish, wrinkled head. They just finished having high mass for it. They're coming out now. Wow, such a small coffin and 10 black Cadillacs to carry it in. That would be just the contrast between the little tiny coffin and the extravaganza, Italian extravaganza, the wedding. I mean, the funeral. So for Gary Snyder, that sense of space, in and out of space, is totally present as a Zen student and a Buddhist. The sense of open space, emptiness, vastness and emptiness and silence is part of the basic aesthetics and even state of consciousness of meditation practice in Buddhist or Zen or Tibetan style meditation. And the awareness of the discontinuity of thoughts. Or as Shakespeare said in The Tempest, when Prospero has resolved all of his problems and is ready to go home to retire and die on his magic island, says to Genoa then, where every third thought shall be my grave. So thought number one, thought number two, thought number three, thought number four. So in that sense, even Shakespeare noticed that thought is sequential and perhaps even discontinuous. There's one thing to think about hot dogs, and that's when you think about your coffin. There's a gap in between. And nobody knows where the next thought will come from. So it's all totally surprise mind. And so in Buddhist terms, they speak of a thought as unborn, like the universe, unborn, in the sense you can't trace it back to its womb. You can't trace a thought back to its root. It appears like a flower in the air and dissolves. It rises, flowers, and dissolves, and is replaced maybe in a 60th of a second later with another thought. And like the movies, one frame after another, it appears continuous, but when you sit and meditate, you realize it's discontinuous, that there is a gap in between thoughts. So that phrase by Shakespeare, every third thought shall be my grave, is quite interesting. Caroline pointed that out to me, that particular Shakespeare number. So an example of discontinuity of thought, gap and space between thought, can be found in most poetry, but say in our tradition in America, the prefiguring the deep interest in Zen and Buddhism and space, mind space, empty space. You can find in William Carlos Williams some examples of attention to the space in your mind and realization of the nature of mind as open space, interrupted by thoughts, so to speak. I'd like to read two short poems by Williams, which are known to most of the Greek poets in interesting to them. One is called Good Night. It's 1917. In brilliant gaslight, I turned the kitchen spigot to watch the water clash into the clean white sink. On the grooved drain board to one side is a glass filled with parsley, crisp green. Waiting for the water to freshen, I glance at the spotless floor. A pair of rubber sandals lie side by side under the wall table. All is in order for the night. Waiting, the glass in my hand, three girls in crimson satin pass close before me on the murmurous background of the crowded opera. It is memory playing the clown. Three vague, meaningless girls, the rustling sounds of cloth rubbing on cloth and little slippers on the carpet, high school friends spoken in a loud voice. Parsley in a glass, still and shining, brings me back. I take a drink and yawn deliciously. I'm ready for bed. Okay, so what happened here? The subject is the changes in his mind, the movement of his mind. It isn't necessarily anything in the outer world. He's observing how his mind moves from one thought to another with gaps in between. Beginning with coming downstairs for a drink of water late at night, turning on the kitchen spigot, watching the water flash, brilliant gaslight, crisp green parsley glass on the grooved drain board. Everything lucid, very present, very clear. Then he spaces out, waiting for the water to freshen. Maybe keyed off by the rubber sandals under the wall table, waiting with a glass in his hand. Three girls in crimson satin pass close before me on the murmurous background of the crowded opera. Then he comes back to himself. It's a memory playing the clown. What am I doing here? Think about this. Then he spaces out again. Three vague, meaningless girls, the rustling sounds of cloth rubbing on cloth and little slippers on the carpet, the high school friend spoken in a loud voice. Parsley in a glass, still and shining, brings me back. So It's the movement of the mind that's interesting there. That's his subject matter. It's a little bit appropriate around 1917, is it, that Einstein proclaims relativity, saying that the measuring instrument determines the appearance of the phenomenal world. So that here is Williams around the same time examining the measuring instrument, the mind itself. And much poetry and art from that time on goes back to look at the mind or the consciousness itself, or the materials of consciousness, the relativism of the phenomenal world. That it's not fixed and stable, but does depend on the observer. That ultimately, the appearance of the universe is determined by the observer. There is no such thing as objectivity, because we are all subject or observers. There is no absolute objectivity, as Einstein points out, because who is the one that's proclaiming or who's observing? Well, us, person. So that actually is consonant with the great proclamation by Whitman. I celebrate myself, and sing myself, what I should assume, you should assume. So Whitman's word for that was person, with a capital T, that was the center. Person is the center of our consideration as human beings, not some fake, supposed, objective, externalized standard, because there is no external, since we are the observers of the external. The only thing we know is what we see of the external. So all we know is our minds. We don't know the real external, and perhaps the real external doesn't even exist outside of our minds. That brings us back to the notion of the romantic, i.e., the subject or subjective or person as being the ultimate arbiter or the ultimate reality, rather than a supposedly objective reality imposed on us by the machine or by inventors of machines. Want to say that the external machine world, with its arithmetical regulation, is reality, and we are not reality. So that finally the individual becomes intimidated and thinks that he is not real, but the external world is real. That he is not real, but the nation is real. And any good libertarian knows that the nation is a figment of the imagination. The personal perception is the only thing that exists actually for us. We cannot know more than what we know. The only thing we know is what we smell, see, hear, taste, touch, and think, and guess, and measure. But nonetheless, it's all us measuring. And it all comes back to the observer, as Einstein said. The appearance of the phenomenal world is determined by the nature of the observer. And that brings us back to the romance of being alive in a world with the universe which is not dead. That the external universe is not dead, except that we interpret it as dead. So I think that probably was a key insight that the beat writers had, and because they were interested in what is the texture of consciousness, what's the nature of consciousness. That was the reason for experimentation in drugs, the reason for the movement toward Eastern thought and meditative practice and actual practice of meditation, the reason for interest in art and poetry as communication between real people about their subjective realizations and perceptions. The following out of Whitman's suggestion that poets of the future in America should specialize in candor, C-A-N-D-O-R, to end the schizophrenia between official thinking and what they thought themselves, what people thought and what was the thought that you're supposed to have, or the thought that you're allowed to have, but the official thought, or the party line, as they used to call it in Russia, where the same schizophrenia was even more pronounced. So how to avoid the almost inevitably imposed schizophrenia, split personality, laid on us by hypertechnology, which assumes that nothing is news unless it's on the radio, that our feelings are not important, but what is proclaimed as official is important. So that how to reclaim our own lives of the usurpation of state, media, and stereotype, how to actually awaken the great dream of some laid on us, what Blake says 6,000 years ago, 6,000 years of sleep, with the imposition of a hierarchical monotheistic thought system, referring the origin of all things not to ourselves, but to an eternal creator whom we could not know and who was there to reward or punish us. So Blake said that the Western notion of the divine was in fact Satan, was satanic, because it imposed on us highway robbery of our own subject, our own consciousness. That's the old Hermetic notion that runs through the Gnostics and the Hermetic philosophers, up through Blake, finally up through Shelley, and probably up to Burroughs, certainly, somewhat through Kerouac and through my own work, which is probably the reason for our interest in Buddhist or Eastern thought, because in Eastern thought there is no central personality of the divine, like there is in fundamentalist Islamic. Plus a priestly case to tell you what God said, or a fundamentalist interpretation of Christian, or fundamentalist interpretation of Jewish, or fundamentalist interpretation of Hindu, the thing lately, the communal riots in India. But the Buddhist and Confucian thing does not assume a central reference point, but assumes like an open space. And the only reference point is completely open space, accommodating space, endless space, with no beginning, no ends. So I guess that's the basis philosophically of what most of the poets of the Beat generation were into. It's not so far away from the interest and studies of the early Romantics, actually, Coleridge, Blake, and in his earlier years, probably Wordsworth and Shelley, certainly. Now, if you got any questions, I've been blabbing along on good reason. Yes.
Kerouac has a poem that illustrates what we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
And going in particular to the universal.
Yeah.
It's haiku, useless, heavy rain driving you to sleep.
Yeah, that's one of the great ones. He has some poems that give you that sense of space. And I have some here. Let me read a couple. Mexico City Blues by Kerouac. He's one of the great seminal works of poetry of this half century. It had a big influence on me. I'm just imitating Kerouac to some extent. It was the book that turned on Bob Dylan's poetry, and through Dylan turned on millions of people around the world to become singer, poet, minstrel, bards. But Dylan told me that someone had given him Kerouac's Mexico City Blues in 1959 and handed it to him in St. Paul. And it blew his mind. That was his phrase, it blew my mind. I said, why? What was it about it? He said, well, it was the first poetry that spoke to me in my own language, in American language. So, describe fires in river bottom, sand, and the cooking of hot dogs, spitted and whittled sticks over flames of wood fire with grease dropping in smoke, the brown and blackened, the salty hot dog, and the wine, and the work on the railroad. $275 billion in debt, said the government. $275 billion in debt, like unending heaven. And like unnumbered sentient beings who will be admitted, not numberable, to the new pair of shoes. A white guru fleece, oh, the purple paradise. It's just a sudden, the unending heaven of the national debt. And the vast Or 10th chorus, that was third chorus. The great hanging weak teeth of India on the map, the fingernail of Malaya, the wall of China, the Kuri of Tipu's thumb, the salamander of Japan, the Okinawa moon spot, the Pacific, the back of Hawaiian mountains, coconuts, Kind, balcony, Tarzan and D.W. Griffith, the great American director strolling down disgruntled Hollywood Lane to Toot, Nebraska, Indian Village, New York, Atlantis, Rome, Peleus and Melisandre, and swans of balls, spots of foam on the ocean. So you suddenly go from this panorama of the world to spots of foam on the ocean. Regarding the sense of discontinuity of mind, star-spangled kingdoms bedecked in dewy joint, don't ignore other parts of your mind, I think. And my clever brain sends ripples of amusement through my leg nerve balls. And I remember the zigzag original mind of babyhood, when you let the faces crack and mock and yak and change and go mad utterly in your night first mind reveries, talking about the mind, the endless, not invisible madness rioting everywhere. Really good for point instructions. The recollections as a kid of cradle or crib recollections of mental daydreaming. This is a little bit more directly into the sense of space glimpse. All 24th chorus, all great statements ever made abide in death. All the magnificent and witty rewards of French letterism abide in death. All the Roman sculptors, heroes, all Picassos and Macassos and Macayos and Machados and Kerouacos, even Ashvaghossa's glorious statement and the Sanghas and Holy Sayadaw, and all the good and kind saints and the divine unabstractable ones, the holy and perfect ones, all Buddhas and Dharmas, all Jesuses and Jerusalems and Jordans and how are yous, nil, none, a dream, a bubble pop, a foam snit in the immensities of the sea at midnight in the dark. So you then get this big, suddenly, what panoramic awareness of this vast immensities of the sea at midnight in the dark, with a bubble pop, a foam snit, essentially. Yes.
I've always thought that the Beats has a serious way of not taking themselves too seriously. There's a sense of humor that we witness here. And I always wondered if that could be explained. Was it a deliberate thing? And the lightness that sometimes next to the seriousness.
Well, what is the nature of mind itself? Mind is serious, mind is light, mind is funny, mind is quixotic. The American Indians had a symbol for it, coyote. You know, fucks your mother, eats your nose off, jumps off the rock, pisses on a rock, and creates the universe. Is that funny or serious? I don't know. We have it in the Roadrunner. The cartoons. We have the coyote image. But around the world, circumpolar bear or raven or any number of totem figures who are the trickster heroes, like Loki, Mercury, who represent the actual nature of the mind, which is contradictory, which goes contradictory, quixotic, both at once, which goes back to another romantic notion, the phrase negative capability. Has anybody heard that? Negative capability. Raise your hand if you know what that is. That's from a letter by John Keats to his brother. He was sitting, directly to your question, he was sitting at a big, dull academic supper. And a couple of professors and somebody was talking about literature, and he was bored. He began thinking, what is it that makes Shakespeare so great? Then he wrote a letter to his brother saying, I was in this situation at supper, and I thought, what makes Shakespeare so different and great than others? It's a quality of negative capability. That is, the ability to hold in the mind completely opposite and contradictory opinions, or views, or thoughts, without an irritable reaching after fact and reason. Now, the key there is everybody wants to be reasonable, everybody wants to be factual, but without an irritable reaching after fact and reason. Without this aggressive insistency that it's got to be black or white, A or not A, liberal or neocon, whatever. that there's a tolerance for both to exist at once in the mind. And Whitman has the same attitude when he says in Leaves of Grass, do I contradict myself? Very well, I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes. So it is the nature of the mind to be democratically large, containing multitudes of thoughts, many of them contradictory. So if you admit your own mind to your poetry, or to your writing, or to yourself, if you allow it, if you take a friendly attitude toward your mind, rather than a condemnatory attitude, take a friendly attitude toward your mind, then you will find a contradiction to be part of the play of mind, so that you're really not bugged by the contradiction. Or as T.S. Eliot said of the writer Henry James, Henry James had a mind so refined that no idea could violate it. Totally different attitudes. That's a Buddhist attitude. Also, I'll come to that in a moment. The Buddhist view is that the universe is completely real. It's here, real. You hit your head if you hit it too hard. Simultaneously and without contradiction, it's completely illusion and Maya, both at once. How do they get to that? Well, come back in 100 years and ask me if this room is real. It'll be like, matter is water, it flows. Back to Heraclitus, everything is flowing, everything is in flux. So what is real for one moment, it dissolves, it's gone like a dream. So because of the nature of the very basic thing of change and transitoriness, or that Heraclitus pointed out, which is the second characteristic of existence in Buddhism, when it describes existence, one characteristic is change, transitoriness. Because of this nature of transitoriness, what is real is also dissolvable, and therefore, by hindsight, not there anymore, therefore might be compared to illusion or Maya. Like a dream, which seems real while you're in it, is real when you're in it, but when you wake up, it's gone. What turns out to have no inherent permanent essence. So existence has no inherent permanent reference point. On the other hand, it seems real while it's here, but on the other hand, it's also simultaneously empty. So the Buddhist view is very similar to the negative capability, the Whitmanic contradiction, that things are both real, or the formal statement of that is in the Prajnaparamita Sutra, the highest perfect wisdom sutra, basic Buddhist text, chanted in Zen and Tibetan shrine rooms every morning. Saraputra, form is no different from emptiness, emptiness no different from form. Form is the emptiness, emptiness is a form. Sensation, thought, imagination, consciousness also like this. Student, this is the original character of everything, not born, not annihilated, not tainted, not pure, does not increase, does not decrease, therefore. In emptiness, no form, no sensation, no thought, no imagination, no consciousness, no I, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no color, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, no eye, no world of eyes, until we come to also no world of consciousness, no ignorance, also no combat against ignorance, until we come to no old age and death, also no combat against old age and death. No suffering, no cause of suffering, no nirvana, no path, no wisdom, also no attainment, because no non-attainment. Every Buddha depends on this highest perfect wisdom, because mind is no obstacle, because of no obstacle. Fear does not rise. That's the central part of the Heart Sutra, highest perfect wisdom sutra. So that was a big influence on beat writers, particularly Snyder and Kerouac. The notion of form or solidity, reality, and emptiness, insolidity, transitoriness, being simultaneous parts of the same coin, different sides of the same coin. Not contradictory, but simultaneously distinct. Negative capability. The ability to hold contradictory ideas in the mind without an irritable reaching after facts. Does that make sense?
How can we have renunciation and great love of beauty? And does beauty have an ultimate value in Buddhism?
Well, renunciation can mean not clinging to thoughts, not having an irritable insistence on maintaining one thought or another, letting your thoughts go, taking a friendly attitude towards your mind, observing your thoughts and letting them go. As for the instructions on that, we come from Blake, which are the same as the Zen instructions. He who binds to himself joy does the winged life destroy. He who kisses the joy as it flies lives in eternity's sunrise. So in other words, another way of putting it is a favorite Blake poem that Bob Dylan asked me about a year ago. So I asked a thief to steal me a peach. He turned up and died. I asked a live lady to lie her down. Holy and meek, she cried. As soon as I had gone, along came a thief, and twixt earnest and joke, had a peach from the tree, and without one word spoke, still as a maid, enjoy the lady. So twixt earnest and joke. So Buddhism, the beauty, your attitude to your beauty is renunciation, twixt earnest and joke. Don't try and cling to it. On the other hand, if you don't cling to it, it passes, like all things are transient. But then more comes along. Whereas you cling to it, it turns ugly and clogs your mind. I want that guy. That's the girl I wanted all along. I won't have anybody but her. I'm going to kill her if she doesn't love me. I'll kill myself. Instead of saying, well, next time. So the Buddhist attitude is non-clinging and renunciation, but on the other hand, it doesn't mean non-enjoyment and non-appreciation. So the Buddhist view is that art is a major mode of meditation. That artwork and appreciation of art is a major way of mind training. It's different from maybe some of the puritanical Western views of Buddhism or Marxism, for that matter. I can't be a great writer until I'm a member of the proletariat. I can't be a great writer unless I've been blessed by a vision of Christ.